Hi, and welcome to everyone for joining us for today's webinar. Today we'll be talking about DMARC, Demystified, securing your email domain, implementing a robust system to enhance email security. I'm going to go over a few housekeeping items before we introduce our speakers. Our webinar will run about 45 minutes, but there's always a chance for Q&A. We may hit an hour. This webinar is recorded, so if you'd like to review the materials again post-event, we will be sending that to you with the links following the presentation today. And we will have a Q&A panel active through the GoToWebinar interface. So please feel free to use that functionality. We'll get into your questions at the end of the presentation, or if possible, we'll do it in between slides as well. If we do run out of time or your question is just simply too juicy to cover, we will follow up with you after the fact. So let me tell you about who we are. So we are DataPrize. We are a national managed service provider with locations, employees, and customers all across the US. You can find us in tons of industry verticals, and we have been branching out to various cities to have a more regional presence, one of which is RevelSec, which is located in the Houston area, and with whom one of our speakers came to us from. And then Mimecast is a giant in the email security services space. They are consistently winning awards, being recognized for new innovations, and bringing expertise into the industry. And we're very, very thankful to have them with us. So let me take a couple moments to introduce you to our speakers. I'm Lori Fawcett. I am a senior marketer on the DataPrize team. I'm joined by Mark Kinnear, a senior solutions architect from the RevelSec team, who is our resident email expert. And we are honored to have with us Renee Swank from Mimecast. He's a sales engineer who really builds bridges between our customers and solutions. Thank you guys so much for your time today and making this a great conversation. So let's quickly review what we'll be going through today. We'll do a really brief introduction on DMARC. We'll explain what DMARC is and kind of get into the nitty-gritty of it. Then we will talk about BEP, which we'll go into a little bit more, and all the ins and outs of that. But before we dive right into that great material, I want to orient us a little bit into why we're having this conversation. So I'm a big fan of data, and these are numbers that don't lie. Attacks on email, they're prevalent. They occur frequently. They can be the cause behind many cyber attacks and are some of the easiest ways for hackers to infiltrate organizations or steal information. So as we'll discuss, implementing DMARC is one of the best defenses to help protect yourself and your organization against these. So that's why this topic is so helpful today. All right, so let's get this show on the road. So DMARC is really the global standard for email authentication. It allows senders to verify that the email really came from who it claimed to have come from. But instead of listening to me talk, why don't we go through this excellent overview video by Mimecast to walk through the solution or what DMARC is and orient everybody together.
DMARC is an email validation system designed to protect your company's email domains from being used for email spoofing, phishing scams, and other cybercrimes. DMARC creates a link between two email authentication techniques, SPF and DKIM, by validating whether a sending source has been authenticated with either technique. With DMARC, you can verify that all legitimate sending sources have been properly authenticated. Once the DMARC compliance milestone is close to 100%, you can instruct email services like Gmail, Hotmail, and others to reject all malicious senders by enforcing a strict DMARC policy. So, the next time someone tries to send an unauthorized email on your behalf, the receiving system will reject it. When configured and monitored correctly, DMARC policies are highly effective, and adoption rates reflect that. More and more organizations have adopted DMARC or have plans to do so, and DMARC compliance is often mandatory. However, many organizations struggle to enforce DMARC, and that can leave them vulnerable to attack. It's even more worrying given how prevalent brand impersonation has become. Nearly half of respondents to Mimecast's 2021 State of Brand Protection Report saw a significant increase in the volume of spoofed emails that misused their organization's brands. So, how can you easily and effectively implement DMARC policies? Meet Mimecast DMARC Analyzer. It provides 360-degree visibility and governance across all email channels to move you to an enforced policy as quickly as possible. This solution helps prevent business email compromise, protect domains against brand impersonation attacks, and improve email deliverability. Mimecast DMARC Analyzer de-risks and speeds up the DMARC enforcement process to block inbound attacks and protect your brand from abuse.
Is it still showing the video for you?
It is, yes.
Okay, cool. I'm trying to close that right now. Just keeps coming back. Sorry.
It's all good. It's the first time we're testing out this type of tool, so you know, a little try fail is always welcome.
Let's see here. Whenever I hit X, it just comes back.
Here, I can take back presentation.
I'm going to stop the share real quick and then,
Okay.
or yeah, if you want to, okay, there we go. Should we see the presentation now?
There we go. Perfect.
Perfect.
Yes, it's back.
All right. So yeah, that was an excellent video. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you guys to get into the meat of the discussion. Let's talk about DMARC.
Awesome. So I'll get started here and then I will pass it off to Mark for a brief moment. So let's break down DMARC into its basic form. It's used to protect your brand. Marketing is often one of the most expensive parts of running any business. Protecting your good name and all the hard work you put into your brand is extremely important. Without a proper DMARC implementation, malicious actors can easily spoof your domain and send out malicious emails. Think of the damage that could be done if someone were to send emails to your suppliers while making use of your company's domain name. Malicious actors can easily find your supply chain, stakeholders, and customers. They can easily create emails that look like they're coming from you while requesting information like trade secrets, payments, etc. DMARC Analyzer enables you to have full visibility of anyone trying to send an email using one of your domains and helps protect you from brand damage, potential lawsuits, or business email compromise and social engineering attacks. So Mark, what have you seen with DMARC with some of your clients or experience?
Yeah, so we've definitely seen an increase in the use of spoofing as a threat to a lot of companies, increasing over time. They're always crafting new ways to try to trick, users into tricking them into mostly payments. So we've seen an increase in that. We actually had a company that had a spoofed email come from their supply chain supplier, which actually tricked their accounts payable into sending a payment of over $1 million. So that was probably one of the bigger ones, but we do see that constantly being attempted, exploited out in the wild today.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Thanks for providing your bit of history around that. So to kind of reiterate on that, right? I'm willing to bet that everyone on this call has received a fake PayPal email before. While we might be savvy enough, most of the time to not fall for something like this, other people might not be. A malicious email can look like it came from your brand's domain, which you do not want to happen. You want that email to end up in the junk folder or ideally be flat out rejected if that recipient is honoring your DMARC record, which they certainly should be, or we would hope they are. DMARC was created in 2012 by major email providers to detect and prevent spoofing. I've included a view of some of these on screen. PayPal was a large one early on with how easy it was to send and receive money at the time with minimal protections in place for end users. The increasing demand for cybersecurity insurance has created an additional call to action for DMARC compliance. Insurance companies want to protect their investment, and if we know anything about insurance, find a way to avoid paying out any claims. So, with some of that fear mongering out of the way, how does DMARC work? So DMARC itself is not an authentication technique. It's a way to enable increasingly strict handling of messages that fail authentication checks, ranging from no action through altered delivery up to message rejection. It relies on two existing authentication methods, SPF and DKIM. Both combined create a valid DMARC record, as you can see on the screen. Because the domain owner and email source both need to work together, a malicious source will never achieve alignment with SPF and DKIM. This enables you as a domain owner to control and block unauthenticated messages. Setting up DMARC can be done without setting up DKIM and SPF first. Can be done without setting up SPF and DKIM first. And this has to do with 3 policies. So the first part I'll go over is SPF, or Sender Policy Framework. I know it's very complicated looking. My eyes glaze over just looking at it myself. So let's think of it this way. You're sending a letter. At the top left of that letter, you write down the return address on that piece of mail. In this case, that would be the SPF's return path, or the from field. The letter makes it to the post office. They're the receiving mail server, so that gmail.com, whomever you're sending that message to. They double check the letter to make sure there is a valid return address on that piece of mail, or they're verifying that the return path is valid, that the address exists. Before passing this letter or email to the final recipient, they also do some additional checks as part of that. The post office or mail server verifies that return address, does not have a stamp over it, it's legible, like it's not smeared, again, that the address exists. And let's see, sorry, I am stuttering a little bit here. And they of course want to make sure if that letter were not sent from you, but bears your name, that they are allowed to send on your behalf. So if everything is valid, then SPF passes and the letter goes through. If it's not valid, like it came from a third party that is not authenticated by you, SPF will fail. SPF does not survive being forwarded. So if it came from you to a third party, then to the post office, SPF would not be valid in that case because it does not survive that. So mail forwarding services, some like you may recognize like Constant Contact, Mailgun, etc., can cause your SPF to fail if not set up correctly. So they must be listed as a valid source, and there's some additional things you can do to prevent that from failing as well. So we'll move on to DKIM, which is another kind of scary looking chart. So DKIM is a newer technique and relies on cryptographic signatures for authentication. So what this is a public key hosted in your DNS. There'll be a private key in the headers of the email. And when that recipient receives it, they do a comparison. So to kind of break that down a little bit more, think of DMARC as a wax seal, or sorry, not DMARC, DKIM as a wax seal placed on the letter. The recipient of your letter will inspect it to verify that the wax seal has not been broken. To do so, they will take a look at the original stamp used to make the seal. They're able to cross-reference that. They then compare that, what is on the letter. If they match, DKIM will pass. Because the DKIM signature matches what is in the email headers and that public key hosted by you. So a malicious actor will never be able to spoof that DKIM signature because they don't have access to your key. So here's an example of how DKIM works by combining both SPF and DKIM. Your eyes might have already glazed over by this point, or you're thinking, all right, if this is a standard, why can't I just do this myself? So here is an example of some of those reports that you will receive from those ISPs or email providers. This is just a small snippet of an aggregate report. It's an XML, and it's simply not intended for human consumption. Sure, you could separate all the components like I have here and easily view it if you can understand XML. But one thing I didn't mention is you'll be getting hundreds or thousands of these reports. So looking through them all is really not feasible. Even if you have an entire team dedicated to it, there's simply too much data to parse. Here's an RUF report, which is another report that will come alongside those aggregate reports. These are used for more forensic analysis and can contain a lot more detailed information about the email for those forensic purposes. And then here's a little bit of trivia. So what does DMARC combine?
And if you will put your answer in the chat or the questions, we will definitely be rewarding a gift card for this answer.
Yep. So again, just to reiterate that, DMARC is what combined makes DMARC, right? So put your answers in the chat, and I will go ahead and move on to the next slide. So I mentioned that DMARC consists of policies, right? So a DMARC policy consists of 3 levels. The information gathering stage, or P equals none, is the first stage of that journey. Then the second would be the quarantine stage. So you are telling the receiving mail server that messages that fail the SPF or DKIM alignment will be flagged and start to show up in that recipient's spam folder, or P equals quarantine. Once DNS has been properly configured and all of your sources have been verified, you start to outright reject DMARC, or you're telling the recipient, sorry, to outright reject anything that fails DMARC. This is the way to protect your domain, because if it does not match or is not authenticated to you, that receiving server will flat out block the message and bounce it. All the while, you are getting those reports of what is being quarantined, what is bouncing, etc. And that's what those RUA or RUF reports are. So the risk of turning it up to reject right out the gate is that you can inadvertently block legitimate email from being rejected or from being received by those sources. So for example, if marketing has a tool you're not aware of and you change it to reject, that marketing tool will no longer work because they never told you about it and it's not in your SPF record. So it's important to verify everything before going from that P equals none or straight to a reject state. So small recap here. Inbound security, for example, Mimecast, we're blocking spam, viruses, preventing email compromise, all that good stuff, right? We also check the DMARC record. So if someone sends you a message, Mimecast is verifying that that sender says who they say or is who they say they are. And then your DMARC record is that outbound control and visibility to make sure that any email going around the web, wherever it is in the world, is authorized by you, is not someone acting in a potentially malicious manner. So here's an example of a DMARC journey. So the first step is the onboarding, would be the kickoff. You're loading your domains, the domains that you have. You would set up users, set up your initial DMARC record, right? This is kind of that P equals none state where you're just collecting information just to see what's being sent out. The governance stage is part of that monitoring process. You're gaining that visibility, identifying ongoing sources. The next step is the policy analysis phase. So this is where you're starting to change things to that quarantine state. So you're letting receiving servers know if something does not bear or does not match your SPF or DKIM information, to either quarantine or reject it based on which settings you set. The other part is the policy enforcement. So you are making continual adjustments to that policy, continuing to monitor how many messages are being rejected or blocked. Are there legitimate sources within your company that you're not aware of that you need to add to that record? And then the active monitoring. DMARC is not a set and forget type of solution. It's a continual journey, something you'll want to always watch for once you get it set up. because you never know if someone could set up a tool in your organization that you weren't aware of. And you want to make sure that if it's a legitimate tool, that the mail is going through properly.
So we have a great question from the audience.
Awesome.
And if it's something we need to hit at the end, let me know. We can move it back. But it is it best practice to use IPs or host names for SPF? And is there a way around having more than the 10 entries?
So that one can include, there's a lot that I can answer about that. The best thing to do, I would say, is a form of like SPF delegation or SPF flattening, and that is to avoid the lookup limit, that 10 lookup limit, because what you will do is redirect that SPF lookup to, say, Mimecast, where we host all of those IP addresses for you. So that counts as one lookup rather than, say, going to this host name, which has 4 lookups built into it, right? So that can get complicated very quickly. So I think we can talk more about SPF delegation a little bit later.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so there's a few best practices depending on how your environment is set up and what you're doing. So, but it is a really good question. So that being said, this slide is pretty easy because I can kind of just read off of it and talk to it, right? So all of those RUA and RUF reports are viewable in our easy to use web interface. So DMARC is a SaaS solution, so it's on the web, and all of those reports go straight into our easy to use web console. So this is how you can gain that insight and control of who is sending email on behalf of your domains. So it gives you that full 360 visibility. You can mitigate the risk of deploying DMARC and inadvertently blocking legitimate email because you have access to that data. And it gives you self-service tools and a recommendation engine. So it kind of gives you recommendations on what you should do with this source. And for example, if there is a source that you do use, we will include helpful documentation in there for specific sources that we're aware of, so you can easily get that SPF or DKIM compliant. And then there's the alerts and reporting, of course.
So before we jump from this one,
Yes.
another good question is, and it's specific to Mimecast service. So
Okay.
Is the service licensing based, or is it number of domains, number of users? How is it typically priced?
So with that pricing, I know kind of Revel may have their own pricing, but it's usually based off of your users and domains. So the amount of mail flow that's expected to come from that type of domain, and how many domains are we monitoring. Keep in mind, when I say domains, I'm talking about like top level domains, right? So google.com would be one domain. We're not going to count mail.google.com as a secondary domain because that's a subdomain. So we're just talking about the primary domains when we say that. So
and just to add, those are
yes.
domains specifically sending emails to, because some companies might have other domains, but they're not really sending emails.
Yep. Good call. All right. So we'll move on to this. So I'm sure you've all seen an update from a company through text or social media saying, hey, don't trust this communication. So these are some statistics that show a decrease in malicious email volume with a people's reject DMARC policy. And Mark, I'll kind of turn it over to you to talk about like some statistics that you've seen while implementing DMARC for your clients.
Yeah, so this definitely correlates to what we've seen as well with DMARC being implemented. And, think of the reasoning here. So this is telling you, when you see data like this, that there are people impersonating your domain. Obviously, if you get your DMARC to the point of reject and you are able to measure by numbers like this to see that decrease, that's telling you right there that you were being spoofed with your domain. The other thing too that is really interesting and drives the point home is When you get to reject mode, the attackers who are trying to spoof will actually get bounce backs. And so a lot of these numbers too are based on, we have some statistics coming up for that as well, but that since they're getting bounce backs, they know that your DMARC being set to reject is really stopping their attempts at those spoofs. And so they are going to go to an easier target at that point and move on, which is another reason we see these numbers decrease over time.
So something that, I mean, is quite evident is it looks like as soon as you implement this, you start seeing results. What does a typical implementation timeline look at? I know we talked about it a little bit, but if I were ready to implement DMARC onto my company's setup today, how many weeks, months, what can I expect?
Yeah, so the way that works is it really depends on how large your organization is. First off, what your email volume is and how many sources you have. If it is a smaller organization, you could set that to the P = none state. I always recommend leaving that in that none state for at least 2 weeks to start gathering those reports and not block any email. Then you have a good idea of the sources, and you could easily update your SPF records or your DKIM with those sources, again, if you have very few, and go straight to a quarantine or reject state, if you're comfortable with that. I say comfortable, and what I mean by that is looking at the amount of data that you're receiving, right? How many people are sending on your behalf? Are you receiving a lot of malicious spoofing happening out there? Another thought would be with that, if you're implementing DMARC, say if you're standing up a new domain, just set it to reject right away because there's nothing coming from that domain. So that's an easy change and something that you can easily set up by just making sure it's set up right from the get-go to prevent any future work. So,
and another question that came through, is it possible to do this on your own, or do you really have to use a tool to help automate this type of thing?
I would say you need to use a tool. It's too, I showed those XML reports earlier. So unless you find some way to parse it yourself and create your own tool, you really need to use a bespoke tool like ours.
Well, and with the updating, I mean, if you don't have a large enough in-house IT, I assume you really have to work with someone consistently to, like you said, it's not a set it and forget it.
Right.
Is that something, Mark, you've seen customers kind of come back for?
Oh, definitely. Remember, you're going to get one of those reports, one or two, the RUA and RFA, RUF, I'm sorry, for like every email sent within your environment. So if it's a, single domain, very static environment, like your home lab, that would be something that you could probably just do on your own. Not going to get a huge quantity of emails. You're basically just going to see the ones you sent to those receiving email servers and what their verdict was. So for like my home lab, I was able to go to reject mode doing that method. But that's like a single person. If you're in a company and, you're just going to get inundated with a large amount of those XML-based files. And like Rennie said, going through that, it's not really consumable by humans. So you really need the tool. And then also having a service to assist you through that whole process with the tool is really needed. And one thing too to add, the continuous monitoring piece when you go to reject mode, the reason you continuously monitor is, things might be changing within your environment. So in highly dynamic environments where you might have a very large marketing team or other entities within your company that are using services that send mail on your behalf, you really need to be able to see what's happening with that so that you can make sure those legitimate emails go through and the illegitimate ones are dropped.
And so kind of next step on that was one of the questions from our listeners was, is there a minimum size? So they have a company that is 20 to 30 employees. And so it sounds like absolutely is there a limit on how small of an organization Mimecast would serve? Or?
For that, some of the licensing stuff, I'll be honest, I'm not super privy to. I'd prefer to be the engineer rather than talking about the money part, even if sales is in my name. But I would say no for something like that. Because it's important. Sorry.
Yeah, I've seen that as well. And really, there's no minimum because you could have a smaller company that maybe that company, that's all they do is some sort of marketing as their business, right? To where they're generating lots of email. So in that case, there's no minimum on that.
Yeah, it's also examples like law firms as well, right? A law firm may have 3 attorneys and 2 paralegals, however big they are. They still need to make sure their domain is protected.
Yeah.
All right, let's go ahead and move on. And this is a slide I like because I get to pass it off to Mark to talk a little bit about DMARC compliance, or sorry, PCI compliance.
Yep. So PCI 4.0 is actually coming out to be in March 2024. So it's pretty quickly approaching. One of the requirements in that is that any company, even if you're not strictly falling under PCI, there's new regulations being set by PCI and even government agencies now that are expanding the definition of what could possibly include any part of a company or a supply chain that involves credit card processing. So if you're taking payments online of any kind, including credit cards, you might be deemed as needing to meet this requirement. And one of those requirements coming is that you have DMARC implemented and set to reject. They will actually start enforcing that in March 2025. So they're kind of giving companies a year from the time that they're setting forth the standard to when they're actually going to be checking, and fines could be imposed and things along that nature if a company is found not to have that implemented.
Awesome. And with that, we can move on to brand exploit protect. Is there anything else we need to say before I kind of move on with this? Cool. All right. So let's do a quick little knowledge check, right? So what % of companies were aware of attempts to misappropriate their domain? Mentioned it at the start of the call.
And this is worth another gift card.
So again, this one's a much trickier answer. So again, what % of companies were aware of attempts to misappropriate their email domain? So while people are thinking that, let's go ahead and move on. So here's some benefits to Mimecast Brand Exploit Protect. So we're eliminating live attacks and blocking any potential scams. We're protecting customers from falling victim to false positive websites and domains. So like an impersonated website with malicious content that has been marketed as a genuine URL. Safeguarding organizations against their brands being fraudulently impersonated, and using the intuitive dashboard we offer to monitor activity and anticipate any potential threats. So that said, I'll go ahead and show a brief video on how that works. Now I get to figure out how to play the video again. All right, here we go.
Brand impersonation attacks that imitate your online presence to prey on unsuspecting customers are on the rise. Too many companies have learned the hard way that these attacks One, cause serious and often irreparable damage to brands, and two, are extremely difficult to prevent. After all, 40% of customers don't hesitate to click links from their favorite brands. 80% of customers received a phishing email in 2020, and 55% clicked search results that took them to a spoofed website. But how can you protect what you cannot see? Legacy security tools cannot defend against modern, automated attacks. Even old standbys, such as two-factor authentication, can be easily bypassed using a man-in-the-middle attack. What's more, a Security Operations Center, SOC, spends at least 330 hours on average resolving an attack. Mimecast Brand Exploit Protect solves these problems with an automated multi-layer detection platform that combines AI, machine learning, and human analysis to secure your online brand reputation. Our comprehensive approach allows for early detection of newly registered domains before the impersonation attack is launched, response to attacks before they reach your customers, swift takedown of the malicious domain, and the ability to take down a fraudulent domain in 4 hours on average. Simply put, with Brand Exploit Protect, you can find and neutralize phishing attacks before they're unleashed, and instantly block malicious URLs or domains across email and web. Combined with our trusted solutions, Brand Exploit Protect provides a multi-layered solution that puts your security first.
All right, let's go ahead and share the presentation again.
Oh, seamless. Look at that. You're a pro.
All
I
right.
know, it only takes one, right?
There was an interesting question that came through about Microsoft. Do you mind answering that now, or should we?
That's fine.
Okay. So my company uses Microsoft 365 for email with our custom domain. 365 uses DMARC by default for inbound emails. Is it still required to DMARC services to have a DMARC service like Mimecast?
I would say yes, because you have to remember the thing that makes DMARC what it is you are telling the receiving server, so those inbound messages, you're telling that receiving server what to do with a email that is not authenticated by you. So the DMARC Analyzer is for properly setting up your DKIM and SPF so that when Microsoft receives that inbound message, they check that record and go, okay, do I reject? Do I quarantine? What do I do with this message? So Microsoft has that, pretty much Gmail has that. They're all looking at that DMARC record when they come in, but this tool is for configuring that record so you can tell those receiving servers what to do with your messages if it has not been authorized by you. So hopefully that clarifies it for you.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, inbound being the key there. So yes, Microsoft's going to check DMARC on when mails are received into Microsoft, but when you're sending mail, that DMARC's not necessarily or not in place automatically on the Microsoft side. If it were and they just set it to reject, you would be getting a lot of legitimate emails dropped by those other receiving mail servers, because most likely there are some other entities that are sanctioned by your company to send mails that look like they're coming from your domain, which very popular is the marketing team, just to name one.
Yep, it's a great reiteration. Thank you.
I definitely feel, as your resident marketer here, many of these attacks feel like my fault. So just for the record, it's not my fault always.
All right. That said, is there any other questions, or should we move on to Brand Exploit Protect?
And thanks for that, Lori. But you know, those are legitimate emails, so those are okay.
Oh, fair, absolutely fair.
And so just keep in mind that I could use any available tools, many are out there, to basically craft an email to look like I am coming from your domain name. And if you don't have DMARC in place set to reject, the chances are I'm going to be able to get through. So that's basically the biggest protection reason to have DMARC in place.
Yep. Cool. All right. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about Brand Exploit Protect by Mimecast. The more I talk about this, you'll kind of find that DMARC and Brand Exploit Protect can work together, and you'll see more about that here in a second. So, the anatomy of a phishing attack. So, what an attacker is going to do is they're going to look for their target or a specific market they want to specialize in attacking, be it, hospitals, accounting firms, whatever, right? Once they found their mark, they'll start to build an attack to imitate their target's domain or website. One such technique is they will scrape the contents of a web page. So this can be a login page to gain someone's login credentials, a payment field for someone to donate to their local Little League soccer team. Whatever business you're in, they'll find a way to target your user supply chain or your customers to extract whatever they want. So we can see here there's a vertical line in the middle, right? There's kind of what separates the two. What we want to do is we want to be proactive here. So DMARC and BEP work together to prevent those types of attacks. So DMARC prevents attacks from spoofing your domain via email by authenticating all emails coming from your domain or bearing your domain name, or and to make sure they're authenticated, right? Brand Exploit Protect works by preventing your website and brand from being spoofed. So a URL that is similar to yours, right? Or that has a fake login page, something like that. So this is a two-phase proactive approach to create a walled garden for your brand and protect not only yourselves, but more importantly, your supply chain and customers, because you don't want to be the reason they get compromised, right? So phishing attacks are becoming more and more common through an ever-increasing method of channels, right? So Mark, do you have any examples of some recent phishing attacks you've seen?
Yeah, definitely. And I think everybody's probably seen this happen, but like the perfect storm for an opportunity for an attacker, right, would be, okay, we don't have DMARC in place, which, by the way, you can take any domain name, plug it into some tools online, including the Mimecast tool, and see if a company has DMARC or not. And so it's very easy for an attacker to see that. So now I can spoof an email. What am I going to do? Well, let me scrape their website, like Rennie said, and I'm going to put a link in an email to them that says you need to reset your Active Directory password. Please click the link below. Probably, that's a very popular one, and I'm sure most everybody on this call has heard of that happening. And typically if that gets clicked on, they take them to that website, they enter their credentials, reset their password, quote unquote, right? And now the attacker can gain access through other methods within inside the company.
And we're not just talking about access. We're talking about actual revenue that could be lost, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's company portals that are public facing, which most companies have now. You have Microsoft itself exposed. Now you have their username and password that you can get into their email account. If there's not other things set up to protect that, SharePoint, VPN, a lot of different online resources can be exploited now.
Yep. So great examples there. Let's talk about kind of just more reiteration, right? Who is this impacting? We touched on this. It can impact your customers, supply chain, brand, business, data. So there's a lot than just like a little annoying attack or a nuisance, right? They can do a lot of damage. So with all that spooky talk out of the way, how do we actually address this? So the way Brand Exploit Protect works is it consists of 3 parts, right? So I'll start with the top left portion, or the proactive intelligence. So what we're doing is we're actively scanning and looking for similar domains to your brand. So we call this our advanced similarity engine. The name more or less speaks for itself, right? We're scanning the web for similarities, homoglyphs, are they moving characters around? Anything that can potentially fool a user in a URL, because they could change that around with a Cyrillic character that looks very similar or identical to a Roman character. We'll catch things like that. So an example we see here at Mimecast a lot is if you replace an M with an N and an R, or Merncast, it can look like Mimecast at a glance. So they can do things like that. We catch the majority of attacks that way. And just for another piece of information, and Mark kind of touched on it a little bit, phishing is becoming very cheap to do. So you can buy like a phishing kit for like 50 to 100 bucks, right? You don't have to be technical. You just pay the money, set it up, start attacking people. It's pretty easy. And it's not economical or remotely possible to buy any lookalike or similar domain to yours and park it. There's too many variables. It costs too much money, especially depending on the domain. And most importantly, you're not getting any visibility into those types of attacks. So the second stage of that proactive protection, and one that is much stronger, is an attacker that is taking the time to develop an attack. They will scrape your web page, like we mentioned earlier. We include a JavaScript that you can embed into your web page. It's innocuous in nature and basically invisible to detect. It just looks like a normal piece of JavaScript. It doesn't say Mimecast on it or anything like that. It's very simple. The code is dormant and waits for someone to come along and just scrape your web page. Once scraped, the agent will know it's not where it's supposed to be, and it will send a disguised packet, and much like ET, phone home and let us know. Once that takes place, if we're not already aware of the website, it lets us know of its existence. We will watch that thread evolve over time. Are they making a page that looks similar to yours? What types of changes are they making? Did they add a login page with your logo? That's just a few examples. This allows us to have proof of all changes they have made while an attack develops. Performing a takedown, is very difficult. You must have sufficient evidence of malicious intent before a DNS registrar or any form of web registrar will take action. And that kind of brings us to the remediation phase. So once we have the necessary intelligence or the evidence that we have gathered, we can perform a takedown of a domain. Threat actors know domain registrars do not care about infringement. They will stand up any domain, no matter how similar it is to yours, so long as they get paid. So insert coin, receive domain type of method. It's extremely hard to prove a domain is infringement or is infringing on you or malicious. To perform a takedown is even more difficult because you have to prove without a shadow of a doubt that a web page is acting maliciously. So does it have your web page with a your brand with a login page next to it, with a payment page, something like that, right? It has to be definitive proof. I mentioned this earlier. Simply having a lookalike domain is not sufficient. It must be malicious. So part of performing a takedown without brand exploit protect is you might have to get legal involved, provide the required evidence, which could take weeks or months, or work around any goalpost that the registrar keeps moving, because they don't want to have to take down a website if they're still getting that revenue, because they just don't care. This can cause a significant slowdown for the removal of that site. Meanwhile, that site is harming your brand and potentially other customers or innocent people out there. So how do we fit in? We fit in by using our influence in this space. We've worked with the top registrars and hosting services to collect the information that they require to adhere to any takedown requests. We've done this by having dedicated API connections to those companies within our tool. Once a takedown is initiated, we automatically send them all of the evidence that they require and that they specifically told us they need to take action, and they have no choice. Using our reputation, we can even take the takedown request to ICANN if necessary, or the Internet Corporation for assigned names and numbers, and you can try saying that 3 times fast. We can take down a domain within 3 hours. 3 hours is how long it can take us, just to reiterate that, to have a domain taken down. Some are within minutes. Within this multi-layered resistance solution I have listed on this slide, it's a form of flooding attack on a malicious actor. So this helps mitigate any damage done while we are gathering that evidence to perform a takedown. Because again, I mentioned that it's not easy to do this, so we do have to have that evidence while they could potentially be setting up an attack or doing something else as their method of attacking, right? So the way this works is we have thousands and thousands of bait or honeypot email accounts. If the attacker has an MX record attached to their domain or web page, or so much as sends a single email to one of these bait accounts, we will flood that mailbox with millions and millions of emails. What this does is it ensures that any information they did extract from a potential victim is lost. It's simply lost in the noise. It's too much information to go through, and the attacker will throw their hands up and move on. So that said, Mark, what experience do you have with remediating or trying to take down a domain without a tool like BEP?
Yeah, I wish we had BEP in my former few companies ago where I had to actually try to get some of these domains taken down the hard way, doing it manually, getting legal involved, like you said, trying to contact the registrars. They basically ignore you most of the time. So it's extremely difficult to make that happen. The success rate was not very good. So having that kind of partnership here, and the trust with Mimecast and the registrars, I could see this just being a huge benefit. And using the phishing example before too, where a user could possibly be tricked into entering their credentials into that web page, right? Seeing that you have a tool as well that can flood that with all kinds of noise is just a great feature, I think, too.
Yep. Yeah, and just to mention, like, some of the evidence that we're gathering is we're keeping track of all of the DNS changes they've made over time. So in our tool, you can switch between specific dates, everything we've logged. We are taking active snapshots of that web page, including the HTML. So we are copying or taking pictures of it. You can go back in time. You can see if the website is only up for an hour a day when they're sending out an attack, or is it offline most of the time. You have all of that. You can see the complete who is information history. You can see any certificates they may have added. So we give you access to all of that. And that is why those registrars have no choice but to take action when you send that request, because you are quite literally handing them the receipts saying, here's why this is malicious, and they don't have a choice. So here's a little bit more how Brand Exploit Protect works, because it's seamlessly integrated into the Mimecast Cloud Gateway product. So you can prevent a suspicious lookalike domain from sending inbound email or URLs with a single click. So this enables you to proactively protect your users with the intelligence that we've gathered. So just because a takedown or the evidence stage can take a little time, this is that proactive approach to protect your company while there is an attack, because they might be setting up that campaign to attack you. It might not necessarily be outside users. So this is just a way that as a Mimecast customer, we can protect you even further. So Brand Exploit Protect is a managed service. So it's not just a tool, but support and service are part of it. So what are some of the benefits of that? It's faster response time. for any type of request, right? We have 24/7 SOC analysts monitoring, detecting, and alerting of any potential attack. We ensure the proper end-to-end execution and efficiency of anything we do. We provide you reporting and analysis. And most of all, it helps you save time, expenses, and manpower, because we all know not everyone has the time to continually look on the web for those lookalike domains. I spend most of my time Googling pumpkin spice, so I don't want to be looking for that type of stuff. How does this kind of work as part of our value as well? Artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms. We take that proactive approach. We're actively looking for those types of attacks rather than being reactive. There's no API integration required from you. Everything is seamlessly done by us. We created those connections with the registrars. We seamlessly integrated it with the cloud gateway, so nothing is required by you. We take swift response to anything, and we have a 100% success rate with those takedowns. And then a little bit of trivia here. I'm a little late to it. What does BEP stand for? Just a little, I know I may have said it a million times, but that is a little bit of trivia.
And while we get some of those answers in, one of the questions is, you know, how many takedowns are accomplished by this BEP thing, or what period of time? I mean, obviously you can say like per day, but do you have any good stats for us on that?
You know, like globally, that's a good question that I don't have the stats on right now, but I do think that's a good question. That one may need to be a follow-up item. If you could get down their information, I could see if we have some data on that. Because it really depends. It's not like we're blocking inbound email viruses or something, right? It's more like kind of an as-needed type of thing. But that is kind of, it's an interesting ask and an interesting question, I think, to kind of see like the efficacy of the platform, right?
Yeah.
And with that, I guess I should bring up the question slide. So that's kind of the end of my spiel. And so the questions are kind of where we should go, I guess, right now.
Yeah. So we've answered a lot of questions as we've gone. I don't have any remaining,
Okay.
and I'm almost at time. Mark, is there anything you wanted to cap us off with before we let everybody go back to their day?
No, I think pretty much covered everything.
Okay, well, great. Well, I just want to say thank you again to our speakers for their time today, for our attendees for digging in with us. We'll close out here, and everyone have a great day. Thanks.